Can you design work? Can you design a team culture where there's freedom to experiment, where there's freedom to maybe collaborate in a way that you hadn't thought of? The best ideas aren't going to come from your senior leaders in any given organization. The best ideas are going to come from your experts in the work. Create the space for them to share them.
Welcome to FutureWorks. This is a podcast dedicated to the conversation around innovation within the workspace. So here on this podcast, we're sharing research, inspiration. Together, we'll be diving into conversations with leaders, scrutinizing case studies, nerding out on theories and psychology, all around kind of what it takes to reinvent solutions within the workforce industry. So I'm Gillian.
And my name is Michelle, and I could not be more excited to do this conversation.
I'm so excited to co-host with you. I'm really looking forward to leading our listeners through candid conversation around what's happening in the world of work with Laura, our guest here, who we'll introduce in a second. We're going to talk about work culture and how it can be better and why it's different. We're going to acknowledge the fact that the world of work is changing. The way people work looks different, but expectations have increased somehow. Pressures have as well. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to unpack that. Laura is here today to kind of unpack what's changed with an organizational culture and how we can lift up the people that are keeping our businesses thriving and influencing our day-to-day in the workplace. We're going to dive into defining factors of organizational culture. We're going to talk about how to activate and improve culture and why that is so important. This is something that we strive for on this podcast, leaving people with actionable ways to make a difference in their organization starting immediately. So no matter where you sit in the company, you're going to leave this conversation with something to bring to the table that can make a difference, not only to your team and your organization, but also to your job. So with that said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Laura Martin, who's joining us today, and then we're going to let her talk about herself because she's got an incredible background. So Laura is a human-centric leader. She's paved the path for many companies and the people that are holding those companies together. As an HR exec with 25 years of experience building teams and igniting internal culture, she's currently a consultant. Her diverse professional background stems from finance to ops to HR. And that's allowed her to really dive deeper into finding that sweet spot between what keeps people and teams going and businesses thriving. So, Laura, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gillian.
Can I say one of the things that I love about you before you introduce yourself is that you are so good. I think what makes you so unique is not only have you done the thing, you paid attention while you did the thing, and now you share the thing with everyone. Like, you are not gatekeeping. You are so unselfish with your knowledge. And I love that you took your experience and now you're helping folks kind of start from ahead. So anyway.
Thank you. Thanks for that great intro, Gillian. Thank you so much, Michelle. That means a lot to me. Early in my career, a mentor said to me, never let a peer make the same mistake that you did. And I carried that with me just throughout my career. So it brings me great joy to share what I've learned so that others can make new mistakes. But thank you so much for the great intro. I have been really fortunate to have had a very non-traditional career background. I like to call it my choose your own adventure career. I started at Target Corporation right out of college, and I ended up spending 17 years there, which if you had told me at 22 that I would spend 17 years in retail, I would have, bet you any amount of money that would not be the case. But in that time, I did 11 really completely distinct roles. And so as you shared, Gillian, I was in and out of HR. I did some stints in finance. I worked in operations. I did a stint in core IT, which was certainly a learning experience, and just really had a wonderful opportunity to chase interesting work for leaders who inspired me. And it really just gave me the flexibility and the freedom to really just round out my skill set and frankly take on opportunities where on paper I really wasn't qualified at all. Something that was unique about my time at Target is after my probably late 20s every role I took didn't exist before I stepped into the position. And so that's something that I've carried, forward in my career, is really stepping into new roles, solving new problems, which has been really, really invigorating. So when I did leave Target, I went really the opposite direction. After a short sabbatical, I joined a very small leader development company, and I believe I was about the 50th employee to join that company. So I went from, in my little corner of the world at Target, leading a team of about 80, to joining a company that was smaller than my department. And so that was such an eye-opening experience. I loved it. I started doing a little bit of a combination of product consulting as well as client work. Over my 6 years there, I ultimately built a client success organization, stood up operations. By the time I left, I was also running product, content creation, and the coaching function. So really, all of the teams that went into creating and delivering the services we offered to our clients. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I took so much from that. And the only reason I left is because I got a call from a CEO looking to hire his first chief people officer at a growing local company here. I live in Minneapolis, and that was a role I had always been interested in pursuing. My resume certainly didn't say this is a traditional chief people officer candidate. And so it was just an opportunity I couldn't say no to. And it was just as much fun as I hoped it would be. I loved leading the people function. I from there moved into a larger global organization as head of HR for US. So I really have loved both my consulting work as well as my practitioner experiences.
I think it would benefit all of us to hear from Laura around how you define work culture, trying to emphasize kind of the core components so we can all sort of gut check our meanings of this and level set before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those big words, right, that everybody has their own definition for. And so I think we've all heard the phrases, culture eats strategy for breakfast, or culture is the way things actually get done around here. Like we've all heard those for years. I spent so many years working with large global organizations to realize that there is no one company culture. And so I really think about culture as more what the experience feels like for those in that particular context of work. And so that can really vary location by location, team by team. And so when I think of culture, capital C, I really do think about what does it feel like to be a colleague, to be an employee in this particular work context. And even, again, in 11 different roles at Target, there are some things that were macro culture, but those experiences were wildly different, even within the same organization.
And who is behind building and developing culture within an organization? I mean, your role, chief of people, was that the role?
Chief people officer, chief HR officer. Yeah.
Always the coolest sounding title, but what does it mean, and what does it look like in other organizations?
Yeah, I think it depends on the layer, right? So certainly there are components of culture that are set at the top. There are what is important to the organization. One thing that I don't think gets enough true attention, is company values. And I don't just mean what's on the website, or everybody's can trot out a deck with mission, vision, purpose, values. But if every single employee can't quickly articulate the company values, they're not actually shared values. But when that's done well, and an organization from the top is explicit about the behaviors that matter here, the things that will be rewarded, the things that are expected, that can really have an outsized, influence on culture. But the reality is, every single one of us can shape the culture of our teams, whether you're a leader or an individual contributor in the context of a team. Every single one of us has the opportunity to influence what it feels like to work on that team. Early in my career, also, I heard every interaction you have with someone, you have the opportunity to leave them a little bit more or a little bit less engaged in what they're doing. And if we all take that truth seriously, every single one of us has the opportunity to influence what it feels like to be on our team.
I think my experience in a few different organizations, I worked in one department, and then we'd have to, go do something cross-functional in another department. And it would either, if I was in a healthy culture, you go over to another department, you're like, man, I'm so glad to like come back home to my team. Or, if your culture is unhealthy and you kind of go to your friend's house for dinner, you're like, oh man, like this team has a total different feel. Like, what do you feel like contributes to that feeling in like a larger organization?
I think so much of it is dependent on the leader. And so not to put all the pressure on leaders, we have really hard jobs. We have our day jobs as well as the leading people part. But the truth is the leader has an outsized influence on what it feels like to be on their team. I think a lot of it though is it comes into how the organization, um, what they pay attention to, both from a correcting behavior as well as what gets rewarded. You know, change follows the focus of our attention, and so it's really important as an organization to think about, like, what are you paying attention to, regardless of what you say in your cascading goals or what's on your website. What do you actually pay attention to? What gets rewarded? What gets noticed? What gets people promoted? Those things, whether you're intentional about them or not, directly influence the culture of the team, as well as where do decisions get made. Do
Mm.
you allow decisions to be made at the point where the knowledge is most closely held, or do things always have to run up the chain and then back down? Because what it feels like to be on a team where you might be told you're empowered, but if you can only approve something to a very small degree, otherwise you have to take it up and wait for the meeting or the next quarterly review before you can actually move things forward. There's a dissonance between what you're told you're expected to do and what you're actually free to do. And so the smartest organizations are incredibly intentional in designing reporting structures, in designing where decisions can get made. Again, I won't harp too much on the values, but if you do have shared values, you really can. You don't need as many policies. You don't need as many
Mm.
procedures and best practices. I'll use one example that I just really love from a previous life. The leader development company that I worked for had four core values, and one of those was clients trump prospects. Now, if you think about that, that is a bold statement.
Mm-hmm.
In that company, this is where I received my first vice president position. I was the vice president of client success. Can you imagine how fun it is to be the VP of client success in an organization that says clients trump prospects? Like, it was just amazing. But that could have just been the thing that went on a slide or it went on the website. But here's where it actually came to life.
Yeah.
Our sales team would drop anything to come with me to talk to an existing client. They weren't just chasing new logos. Nobody was asking me, well, what's the upside? What's the revenue associated with this conversation? If this was a client, I could get anybody's attention. When we looked at product road mapping, we weren't building features for the next big logo that we were hoping to hook. We were listening to our existing clients. We were building features for them. When we had all team meetings, we weren't showing the pipeline and drooling over the next logo that we were thinking about. We were celebrating stories from our existing clients. And so everything we did was designed around that actual shared value. And it meant I had amazing client retention. I had an amazing NPS score. Our clients would drop everything to do reference calls for us, which ultimately is a sales tool. But it's just like when you design your workplace and your rewards and your priorities around an articulated shared value, it's really, you can just see unbelievable outcomes from that.
So I actually want to ask you more about the values, because those can be done in so many different ways. They can be written and shared. They can hold meaning or not. They
Mm-hmm.
can be endorsed by teams or not. I mean, we've all seen it all which ways. There's
Certainly.
also one of you references, but there's often external facing values and internal values. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how, from where you've sat in various positions, how often does the team get to participate in the creation of these values versus them coming from just a conference table of leadership, buttoning them up on a deck and handing them over?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of it depends on organizational size. The larger you get, the more likely it's going to come out of a conference room with a bit of a think tank, or frankly, more likely a third party consultant, helping the leaders come up with their values. The smaller the organization, the earlier stages, right? I think the easier it is to really solicit input. But I think that in any organization, you can have listening mechanisms to hear from the teams. What are you experiencing? Where are you seeing dissonance in what we say are our values and what actually gets done around here? And having listening systems set up to really give your team an opportunity to share their actual lived experience is so important. And ultimately, that feedback should help shape that, culture and values. It's not something you want to be changing all of the time, right? I mean, as organizations grow, there are natural evolution points where you might say it's time for a refresh. Like we might have said, we are entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial is one of our core values. And you may reach a size where you actually can't have every colleague making independent business decisions as though they were an owner, simply because you might be tripping over, a different strategy in a different part of the organization. So there are natural growth points where you might want to refresh the values, but it's not something that should change on an annual basis, because it really should shape decisions. Again, how can it shape allowing people to make the best decisions in their particular context without having to plan for or have a standard operating procedure for every possible scenario?
Ooh, I feel like listening mechanism, that is like maybe the first time I've heard that talked about as like a step. Can you do maybe not a deep dive, but like, a 3-meter dive into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
what does that look like?
I mean, the classic is the employee surveys, right? And now there's a million flavors of that. Again, it's from my consulting days. I would say most of those questions don't yield meaningful insight. You really do need either a partner or someone internally who understands how to construct one question that's asking one thing that doesn't give you muddy data. So the traditional way is surveys. A better way is making sure that leaders are talking to their people every week and just checking in and asking the right questions. So this is where I'm a huge believer in coaching. I spent a lot of years deeply steeped in the strengths-based coaching approach. I'll die on that hill. Like that is the way that you unlock human performance and potential. So equipping your leaders to ask the right questions, listen for the right things, and create a safe mechanism for feedback to be gathered and shared. I really believe that we're going to see a surge in smart technology that will help in a confidential way get at employee sentiment. I think what exists today is not fit for purpose, but I know there's innovation happening in that space. I think as we all get smarter about leveraging generative AI, there will be not monitoring tools, not surveillance tools. Those are being built as well. I'm not proposing those, but actual listening and and sharing up. Here's something to think about. This might be a concern. Here are some questions you might want to ask to delve into what's really going on here. I do think technology can be a helper in that. Again, not surveillance, not monitoring, not Big Brother. That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, with remote work, there's just so much less real-time feedback being shared. Mm-hmm. Conversation and exchanges are so focused, so project and deliverable focused. There's not a lot of reading the room in terms of cultural energy. So I love to hear about tech that's being built around getting a pulse on how people are feeling without being able to look at them and walk around with them and see what's going on. So when you're trying to convince leadership to invest in culture, what are you telling them in terms of the impact it would have on their business and on performance, engagement, on numbers? How are you justifying this and making a case for investing in culture?
Yeah, I think the phrase that I've used over the last several years is, and there's been a renaissance of this, is employee experience, right? And that's different from culture, but I think that's been the doorway that I've been able to walk through in terms of it within my own organizations where I've been head of HR, as well as with organizations that I've consulted with, is like really thinking through delivering a compelling employee experience. And I don't mean like ping pong tables and snacks in the office and all and I like those things. I mean, this leader development company, we had dogs in the office. And I mean, that was probably the biggest thing I talked about for my first 6 months there. I thought that was just the best thing ever. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about employee experience. But just really recognizing, and I've said this for years, especially in my IT days, people aren't widgets. So yes, we talk about human resources, but our folks are not interchangeable. And so if you really want not just performance and engagement, but discretionary effort and outcomes, you have to create the conditions in which people can use their brains, figure out how to tap into their strengths, find the intrinsic motivation to contribute, and the more prescriptive you are, the less you're leaving room for folks to find their best way to deliver outcomes. And I'm not saying throw your processes out the window, but I am saying really question, does everyone with this job title need to do this the exact same way? Or if they're clear on the outcomes, can you design work? Can you design a team culture where there's freedom to experiment, where there's freedom to maybe collaborate in a way that you hadn't thought of? The best ideas aren't going to come from your senior leaders in any given organization. The best ideas are going to come from your experts in the work. Create the space for them to share them.
I love that.
That's like a bar right there.
I know. Yeah, we need to be hearing that more often. And that's the point, right? Creating a platform for leadership to be able to celebrate their teams and acknowledge how crucial they are to what's happening.
Oh, absolutely. We hire smart, amazing people, and then in too many contexts, just like give them like here's what you do, and just everybody needs to do this the same way, and shut your brain off. And we're leaving a lot of potential, we're leaving a lot of contribution, we're leaving a lot of discretionary effort, and business outcomes on the table when we don't create the space for our teams to find meaning and find their own way of doing their work. And some of that is my own, like I have made up most of the jobs that I have done. And so I realize that I'm an anomaly there, but even in even in roles where I wasn't the only, or I wasn't the first, there are ways to be creative and take control of how you spend your work days.
Definitely. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into your experiences. I'm curious about what cultural problems you've kind of been forced to address, even though you didn't want to, when it got really hard, one of the challenges that you've been faced with in your job.
Yeah. I think, I'll go back to my Target days, and I have truly nothing but glowing, memories of my time at Target. But at least in the years that I was there, Target was known for being extremely collaborative, to the point of being very, very consensus driven. And so that meant that really decisions weren't made in the meetings. The decisions were made in the meetings before the meetings, and the meetings were more designed to ratify and document the decisions. And for a long period of time, I struggled with that. And then I finally realized I could like it or not like it. The one thing I couldn't do, even as a fairly senior leader, was change that. And so I got over myself, and I learned to do the meetings before the meetings, and I would trot around with some PowerPoints, and it took longer. However, I was so much more effective once I sort of just realized, like, if I choose to be here, this is the way it works around here. And so that's, I was much more effective and much happier when I was like, this is the way that it is. I don't have to like it or dislike it, but this is the context in which I'm operating. Night and day from the next company, which was where I discovered I really love small companies, and just I'm addicted to the pace at which decisions get made in a smaller organization. That doesn't make it better. It just makes it a better fit for me. Other examples, in my first chief people officer role, we had a leader who, by all metrics, was wildly successful. Clients loved this person. The revenue was growing. The quality of the work the clients were receiving was very, very high. But the team reporting to this person was just a revolving door of tears. And this leader was just really unbelievably difficult to work for. And I had a conversation with the CEO and ultimately the executive committee, and I just said, we have a decision to make. Are we going to be an organization that tolerates talented bullies? And different organizations make different choices about that. I have an opinion, but this is a decision that we need to make and stick to. Will we be an organization that tolerates talented bullies? And we aligned, no, we are not. And so this leader was removed from leadership. And it was a difficult decision, and it led to difficult conversations with the client, and it was the right decision. But that was an example where our stated values and what we were tolerating were not aligned, and we brought that into alignment.
Wow, that gives my younger self hope because of the past boss bully experiences that I've had, along various points in my personal career. It's such a shame. So I'm so happy to hear that people are really making a stance there, especially when they have the metrics to show for their place in the room, and that so often overshadows interpersonal experiences.
Yeah.
I wonder, as someone who in my career most often kind of sits in the view from the cheap seats and not in like the C-suite, I feel like I experience that usually on a peer level. And talented bully is like, that is like such a lovely phrase to use. That I have sat in organizations, watched my peers work for that talented bully and felt absolutely helpless. So where, in this like creation of culture and pushing those, shared values, how does someone who sits in the cheap seats kind of influence like, hey, this has to stop happening, especially when it doesn't feel like you have a choice. Like, I need this job, I need to stay here, and I can't make the choice to do something else.
And it's scary. It's a scary thing to voice.
Well, you're vulnerable, right? Especially if this person is your direct leader. And so, I would like to say, having been in HR about half of my career, talk to HR, but the reality is that isn't always a winning answer. And I completely understand that. So I think, a couple of paths that everyone should feel empowered to take is one, what can you control in the situation? And how can you try to create expectations in terms of what interactions should look like? Always in the context of like, this is what I'm contributing, and then this is what I need from you as my leader. And so what I would always advise people is don't focus on the feelings, which I hate to say, but if you're working for a talented bully, that's probably not going to be a successful approach. And so focus on the outcomes. Like, here's what I know that I need. And this is something I've said to leaders myself. Something I know to be true about me, I need context. If you ask me to do something and I don't know the story behind it, I will not feel confident that I'm delivering precisely what you actually need if I don't have additional context into what's behind the request. It's not that I don't trust you. So this is a thing that I know to be true about me. And so I always encourage people to find what are those things you know to be true about you that you can articulate to your boss that will help them get the best out of you. And most of us can at least have that conversation. Hey, when you send me revisions and it's just criticism, it sends me into a headspace of feeling a little bit paralyzed in how to move forward. It would be really helpful if you could highlight yes to this, this, and this, no to that, that, and that. In order, so like there are likely ways that you can convey to your leader ways that they can get better contribution from you if they adjust their approach. The other advice I always give is like find your advocates within the organization. Are there leaders you respect, leaders you admire that you could ask to be a mentor, to be an advocate, to be a sponsor? The worst that they can say is no, or I don't have time, and you've lost nothing. And so whether or not your organization has a formal mentoring program, the best mentors I've had in my life, we were not matched through a mentoring software. They were just mostly women that I deeply admired, that I got up the courage to ask if they would have a coffee with me. And ultimately, they became advocates and sponsors. And so everyone can, even if you're an introvert, I'm an introvert, I'm a social introvert, but I have to, gear up for conversations like that. Everyone can reach out to someone in the organization that they respect and ask for a connection and see if there's an opportunity for that person who's potentially in a different power dynamic with that leader to help to influence.
Ooh,
there's no risk in that.
Yeah. Being open. And I think back to what you were saying earlier about having those conversations around communication and preferences for how you're receiving or giving feedback. Those types of conversations are so beneficial to have at the start of a job.
Yes.
It also shows a level of empathy and kind of confidence and control that will set an incredible tone for the work that you're about to do. So I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit, acknowledge the changes of the world of work that have presented themselves over the years. I want to know more about, I think you were already in your head of people, chief people officer kind of position by then, correct?
I actually was still doing when sort of like everything changed, right? In 2020, I was still at the leader development company.
Okay.
And it is probably what led me to make the change back into a practitioner role. We were so lucky at this company. We were already a remote first team. We were already living and breathing in a world of Slack and WebEx. And I ran, product client services coaching from right here in my office in Minnesota. And this was a Los Angeles based company. And so when everything shut down and not everybody, of course, many workers still went into work, but when knowledge workers, when the office workers stayed home, it was business as usual for us. And so we were able to really help our clients through some of that transition because we had been operating this way for years. That was just the strategy of the company. We found that we could hire incredible caliber talent by saying this position can sit anywhere within the United States. Like that was rare 10 years ago. Now it's not such a competitive advantage, but so incredibly lucky that I'd already learned to do this and to lead remote teams. But I do think the overnight flip and how difficult so many organizations found it, it really didn't create, in my opinion, this is maybe controversial, it didn't create new problems. It exposed existing problems in how work was designed. I personally think it was a gift that we were invited into each other's homes and people, you didn't have a choice to talk about your children with your colleagues because they were right there behind you, and you were trying to be their teacher. And you met everyone's pets. And so it was, it exposed that we all have lives outside of work, and equating time in the office at your desk with your contributions and your value to the company has always been a mistake, in my opinion. And I'm not a mom myself, but most of the women I've worked with over my career are. And, celebrating the folks who can do the long lunches and make it to every happy hour and, be the first in and the last out was never the right benchmark of who is actually contributing the most to the company and to the bottom line and to the team and to the culture. So in many ways, I think it just exposed a lot of ways that work wasn't working. That was part of my draw to move into the chief HR, chief people officer role. Is I'm not, things like payroll and benefits and employee handbooks, and those are all very important. That's not my jam. That's not why I got back into HR. There's a sea change in culture, a sea change in how organizations need to think about making work for everyone. That was really appealing to me, to come back into a practitioner role, to be part of that solution and to frankly experiment on my own, and I've had many lively, spirited conversations with CEOs, who simply want everyone back. And I have a little bit of an allergy when anybody talks about like back to anything, because the thing before wasn't amazing for everyone. So let's look forward to what we want work to be next. And let's stop yearning for how things were 5 years ago, because it wasn't amazing for everyone.
I think, as a mom myself, I think I underestimated how flexible I really needed my schedule to be. And then, my parents are aging. I think there's that as well to consider, that I don't know, I love being able to, my sister called with this huge medical emergency, and it was such a gift to be able to say, I will come work with you from your hospital bed. She didn't need me to do anything. She just, being able to say, I could literally sit next to you and get done what I need to, that felt like such a great change from my previous job, where it was nope, I've got to be here. I've got to be in person, from, Tuesday to Sunday. That's my, I've got to be there, and there's no way I could just drop everything and come. That feels like such a good gift.
Absolutely. I know. I think about, I became a mother in the pandemic, and I often think about these women that I used to work with in the office that I knew were moms, but I never saw them be moms. And I still to this day don't understand. I actually didn't realize that daycare usually ended at 4 p.m. because nobody told me, because these mothers were pulling it off. And so what a change it's been, and what an exposure, like we've been saying, into the reality of what's happening in our lives. I also just love that it resets what's important in the workplace. I'm curious, stepping into kind of the tool actionable thinking here. So I'd love to hear more around kind of great enablers for building culture, whether it's tools, meetings that should be scheduled quarterly, people that should be hired. I'd love to hear more around kind of what people can really be putting into action, small, big, aspirational, attainable.
Yeah. I'll start with what I think every leader should do. And I know this is for the doers, which I love. And so we'll talk about what every one of us can do. But as leaders, the single most important thing you can do is pay attention to your people. It's your most valuable currency. Talk to your people, check in with them regularly. You don't have to be the most eloquent, inspirational leader to just check in with your folks. And if you've got too many people reporting to you to do that, that's a conversation to have with your leader, or that is a time to bring in HR. Just talk to your people. We all need attention at work. That goes a long way in building culture. For the doers, I think, really thinking about what do you want out of your work experience? What do you love doing? Like, how are you spending your days? When I joined this leader development company that I keep talking about, I came in as an individual contributor, which I had not been for many years. I had been leading leaders and leading leaders of leaders for many years at Target when I came into this role as a one woman show for my little department. And I was working with a peer. Similarly, she was a solo contributor. We worked for the same boss. And there was one day we were just on Slack as we were doing our thing, and I remember it so vividly. I was doing data validation of a client data file. This is not an activity that brings me joy. To this day, I have to Google how to do a pivot table every time I have to do a pivot table. Like, it just doesn't stay in my brain. Okay. And so I was just like, oh, I have to do this data validation. And she pinged me back, oh, that's nothing. Our boss asked me to write a job description because we've been advocating for more resources. She's like, ugh, data validation is fun. It's like a game. I have to write a job description. That's the worst. And I was like, hello, here's an opportunity. I will write that job description. It will take me 20 minutes if you will do this data validation for me. And that was the day that we began our journey of me running client success and her running deployment consulting, and moving the direct reports, because our boss was like, oh, she's been here longer. The people should report to her. And she was like, I don't want to be a manager. And I was saying, oh, I miss having a team. And so we didn't ask permission. We just started swapping. We just started, like, we came together, evaluated the sum total of our workloads, and we just started collaborating and didn't ask for permission. And ultimately, it became like one of the best working relationships I've ever had. We're still dear friends to this day. So I'm not saying you have that level of autonomy, like everyone has that level of autonomy. I respect that. But I bet you, no matter what your role is, there's someone in your organization that's wired differently from you that you could befriend and start just thinking about, even if it's just having someone who says, oh, I actually think that's kind of fun. Here's how I look at it. Even if you can't swap the work, just to help you get a different perspective. And over time, you can turn again, no matter what your role is, there's some element that you can influence into how you spend your days, where you don't just feel like you're stuck in for me, like data validation hell.
I think that goes so along with what you said earlier, essentially about like when you are working for that talented bully, but maybe just across the board, like the best things that we can do are look inward at yourself and your gifts, and then look kind of next to you or even like up and next to you for like, hey, that person is doing this thing that like I just discovered about myself that I love. With my current boss, I had this come to Jesus moment, essentially, that was like, hey, it seems like it's taking you a long time to just like write this super quick in my brain email that like I could just knock that out for you And they're like, well, no, like, I don't want to burden you. It's like, it is not a burden. I know it feels like a burden to you, but for me, that is, like you were saying, like, that's so fun.
You both are so lucky to have been in a situation where you can voice that, see it, be comfortable to fix it. I'm curious what processes are in place, or what could people put in place to allow for that to happen within companies?
Yeah, it's a very, very fair point. I feel like, and maybe not every leader, but if you're working in a team where there's a number of folks and it's not the culture that you want, I would invite you just at least have this conversation with your leader. Hey, what if in a team meeting, presumably you're having team meetings, if you're not doing department meetings, at least on some sort of cadence, ask for those. Could we all just share something that's like weird about us that we really love doing that's part of this job? Because it's going to be different things for everyone. Like, what leader is going to say that's a terrible idea, we're not going to do that? They exist, but hopefully that's not the norm, right? And so it doesn't hurt to ask, like, is there an opportunity to just learn more about each other? We even did, I mean, one of my favorite icebreaker questions is if money and talent were no object, like no blocker, what would you do for a living? You learn so much about people and just like what lights them up, what they're interested in. So ask for permission to at least have this conversation with colleagues. The other thing anybody can do in terms of just organizational culture, a lot of times where there's friction, where there's tension, is in between departments. And this is where I think I've been extraordinarily lucky, having moved around so much within the context of one organization. You can't say, oh, finance, those finance people, they just always throw slow things down. If you've been one of them, you can't say like, ugh, IT, they're like everything just takes, if you've been one of them. And so you don't have to bounce around and have a weird career journey like I've done to go make friends in other departments, learn their stories, learn what's great and what's difficult about their jobs, and just build empathy. It's going to help you. First of all, it's like building empathy is a worthy goal in and of itself, but it's also going to help you identify where there might be workflow issues. If you're in the context of a team and there's a frustrating thing about your day job, it's probably due to some combination of inputs and how things come into you and outputs and how you move work off your desk to wherever it goes. Get curious about that. Meet the teams on either side where you have a dependency and they have a dependency, and just hear their experiences. I bet there's probably anyone can find some small way to just make work better if you just get curious and look outside your own inbox, desk, to-do list. You don't need your leader's permission to do that.
So be human. Don't leave that hypothetical door that doesn't exist. We're working remote.
Something else about a leader that I worked for many years ago used to say, if there's something that's a point of frustration, okay, he would say, is this a problem that we're going to solve? And if so, let's stick with it. Let's be a dog with a bone and let's solve it. Or is this just a thing that we live with? And if it's that, let's not waste any more time and energy talking about it. And so I do think in the toughest climates I've worked in, it's where people are kind of just grinding on the same frustrations forever. We've been complaining. I literally heard, I won't name the company, but I heard someone say, we've been dealing with this problem for 12 years. Oh my word. Like, that sounds like a you problem. Like, how have you sat with that for 12 years? So is it a problem truly that needs resolution? And then find the owner of the sale, at least work to escalate it. Or is it just like, this is one of the things that's, is not the way that I would like it to be. But if it's not going to change, like Target was not going to stop being consensus driven just because I preferred to move faster. So then just don't worry about it. Just don't let that be the thing that you spend the best of your mental energy chewing on if you're not going to be able to make a change.
How do you read someone's true connection to values in an interview? Because when I ask that question in an interview, it's a very important question, but I get the same generic responses. So I'm curious, from a hiring standpoint, what question can we be asking in interviews to identify someone who holds really true and important values?
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference in if you're trying to unpack someone's own personal values versus interviewing them against what are your shared organizational values
in the workplace.
Yeah. So I think, and I'll give credit to this marketing company where I was the head of HR. We actually had a number of employees who were, I'm going to say, certified to do the values interview. And so that was the first gate, even coming to the organization. So there was the values interview. They called it fit. I don't believe in measuring for fit. There's just you can go down a whole, bias, rabbit hole, and that's real. But it was oriented around explaining the organization's values and evaluating if that's someone's jam or not. And then it went into the technical interview and the interpersonal interview. And so I loved that approach. And so they would ask questions like how would you rate yourself? And it's not the number doesn't matter. The thinking through, like if one of that company's values was brave, which I loved because you could really hold people accountable for having candid conversations when one of your organizational values is brave. That was fun for me. Like, have you talked to the person? No. Well, it's a good opportunity to leverage the value. So, but we'd add, like, what is that? Like, how would you rate yourself? What does it mean to you? Give us an example in your life where you were brave, or again, whatever other values that but really like listen to their stories, hear how they define it, hear how they measure themselves. Again, the number doesn't matter, but how they explain it is really insightful.
That's so helpful. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. And brave as a value isn't one that I've seen very often. So thanks for sharing that.
This is the only place I've seen it, but I will tell you, I talked about it while I was there all of the time, particularly in holding folks accountable for just addressing their own concerns and addressing, because we've given them permission, not just permission, but the expectation. And we tell them coming in. So there's no surprises. It's not like you've been here it's your annual review and suddenly you're told you need to be a certain way. Like it was very transparent. And it was meant to both attract the folks that would be that would win in this particular context, as well as detract folks who are like, that is not me. Like, that doesn't sound appealing to me at all. That's okay. It's not, no organization is for everyone. That's okay.
Amazing. This was so, so great. It's just wonderful to start out our podcast with such a wonderful conversation.
Well, it was such a pleasure speaking with you, ladies. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I wish you all the best with this podcast. I think it's such a great conversation to carry on.
Awesome, Laura. Thank you so much. And thanks all for listening to FutureWorks.